They took the mill land off my desk before I ever signed a page. They took my wife's orchard and called it excess acreage. They circled a number in red pen, $4,100 a month. Left it on my own kitchen table like a bill I owed them. My son said nothing. His wife smiled the whole time. And then, before dinner was even served, I set one folder down on the table. I asked the lawyer to read it out loud instead. Confused, her father called me. By the time she finished reading, it was her name coming off every account, not mine. And that was before anybody found out about the loan. But before the folder there was the brochure. My name's Dale Boone. I am 71 years old. I did not raise my voice that night. I never do. My wife used to say I could deliver the worst news in this county and still sound like I was reading a weather report. I built a sawmill out of one second-hand saw blade, a borrowed truck. 43 years of standing in sawdust taught me something. Yelling never cured warped lumber. It never cured a bad marriage either. You let the wood tell you what it's going to do. Then you plan around it. The brochure was sitting square in the centre of my kitchen table when I came in from the mill. A glossy folder, Restful Pines Senior Living. Somebody had circled the monthly rate in red pen. $4,100. Circled twice. I stood there in my boots, sawdust still on my collar. I read that number 3 times before I even set my keys down. I didn't call out for anybody. The house was quiet. Gary was still down at the mill office, doing the books he'd taken over from me 4 years back. Felicity was upstairs, running bathwater, humming something I didn't know. I picked the brochure up, turned it over. Nice paper. Somebody paid for the good stock. Matte finish. A photo on the cover of an old man laughing with a nurse, like laughing was part of the package you bought. I set it back down exactly where I found it, square with the edge of the table. I wanted whoever left it there to know I'd seen it. I wanted them wondering if I understood what it meant. I understood exactly what it meant. 43 years ago, I started Boone Ridge Lumber and Mill. One circular saw, bought used off a man outside Marrow Falls, a flatbed truck, borrowed from my own father. I was 28, married 2 years. I did not have $400 to my name, let alone $4,000. I built that mill board by board. Same way I built my own house later, slow, sober, paying attention to grain. My wife, Corinne, kept the books 36 years. She could catch a bad invoice from across a room. She planted a persimmon orchard behind our house the summer we moved in. That's why the hill carries her tree's name instead of mine. Persimmon Hill. She used to say the mill made the money. The orchard made the life worth having the money for. Corinne died 2 years ago. Cancer. Quiet the way she was quiet. No drama in it. Just less of her. Every month until there wasn't any left. I buried her under the oak at the edge of her orchard. She asked me to. I couldn't think of anywhere else that made sense. The last good month we had, before the sickness took the rest of her strength, we sat on the porch most evenings, and she talked, more than she usually did, about things she wanted settled. Not morbid talk, practical talk, the kind she'd always been better at than me. I want the trust finished properly before I go, she told me one evening. A blanket over her knees, even though it wasn't cold. Not because I don't trust you to handle it, Dale, because I know exactly how tired grief makes a man, and tired men sign things they shouldn't. I promised her I'd see it done, and I did, with Priscilla's help in the weeks that followed, while Corinne was still sharp enough to read every clause herself and mark up the margins the same way she'd marked up the mill's old ledgers for 36 years. She caught 2 mistakes in the first draft that even Priscilla's office had missed. A misdated effective clause and a beneficiary line that would have let Gary's name attached to signing authority, automatically after 5 years, exactly the kind of soft opening a patient-in-law could eventually walk through. Fix that, Corinne said, tapping the page. Nobody gets automatic anything in this family. Not even our own son. Especially not our own son, until he's proven he understands what he's holding. She was right about nearly everything in her life. I've come to believe she was right about that too. I have not been the same man since. I don't say that as a complaint. I say it because it matters to what happened next. A man who's lost his wife gets watched differently than a man who hasn't. People start noticing how you hold your coffee cup. They start asking if you're eating right. They start wondering, out loud sometimes, whether grief took something out of you that isn't coming back. Some of them ask because they love you. Some of them ask because they're doing math. I poured a cup of coffee. Black, same as every night of my life. I sat down across from that brochure and let it sit there, being red and glossy while I did some math of my own. 4 months earlier, at Gary and Felicity's anniversary dinner, my daughter-in-law stood up with a glass of white wine. She said, in front of 40 guests, that she hoped I'd finally slow down. Let someone else carry the weight. She smiled when she said it. Everybody laughed. The easy kind of laugh you give a joke that isn't really a joke. I can still grade a green board's moisture just by the weight of it in my hand. That trick saved this mill from 2 bad lumber contracts in 5 years, back before I handed the daily grading over. I told my crew once, half joking, half not, I've been reading wood grain longer than most folks have been reading anything. That's not bragging, that's just fact. The kind of fact a man collects doing one thing for 4 decades. I'm not confused. I have never been confused. I know exactly what a red circle on a brochure means when it's sitting on my table instead of a trash can. Just that morning, before I found the brochure, I'd settled a dispute at the mill. 2 crew members, a delivery schedule. I caught it in about 30 seconds. One man had transposed 2 dates on a shipping manifest. Would have cost us a $400 rush fee if it had gone through uncorrected. My mind works exactly the way it's worked my whole life. Sharp on numbers, sharper on wood, and patient about everything else. Nothing about a wife's death slows down a mind like that. If anything, grief sharpens a man's attention to detail, because suddenly there's nobody left to catch the things you might otherwise let slide. It means somebody wants me gone from my own kitchen. Gary came down around 8. Tie loosened, the way he always looks after a long day doing the books I used to do myself. He's my only son, 39 years old. Decent at heart. Soft in a way his mother used to worry about. Corinne used to say Gary needed somebody firm beside him, or he'd get led around by whoever spoke loudest. Felicity speaks the loudest in that house. Has since the day she married him. Gary met Felicity 9 years ago at a Chamber of Commerce dinner in Marrow Falls, back when she was still building her spa business, up from one rented room above a nail salon. Corinne liked her well enough at first, said she had ambition, said ambition wasn't a bad trait in a young woman these days. It took Corinne almost 2 full years to change her mind, and when she did, she never said it outright. Not the way she said most things. She just started keeping her purse a little closer whenever Felicity visited, and she started double-checking the mill's petty cash drawer after every holiday dinner. Small habits a sharp woman develops when something in her gut won't quite settle. I didn't see what Corinne saw, not at first. I liked Felicity too, in my own way. She was warm, she asked good questions about the business. She seemed to genuinely admire what I'd built with my own 2 hands. It wasn't until years later, standing in my own kitchen with a glossy brochure and a red circle, that I understood what my late wife had clocked years before I ever did. Admiration and appetite can wear the exact same face on a person, right up until the moment appetite finally shows itself plain. "Dad, you eat?" Gary asked, opening the fridge like he was hunting for something specific. "I ate," I said. I hadn't moved the brochure. I wanted him to see it there. He didn't see it. Or he saw it and decided not to. In my experience, that's the same thing a weak man does with most hard truths. He poured a glass of milk and went upstairs without another word. I sat there a while longer, coffee going cold, listening to the pipes groan as Felicity's bathwater ran. I didn't say anything that night. Not to Gary. Not to her. I refilled my coffee once more, out of habit more than thirst. I read that label twice more before I folded it in half, put it in the drawer where I keep old receipts. I wanted a record. I've learned that lesson the hard way, in business, and now it seemed at home too. Next morning I drove to the mill, same as almost every morning of my adult life. Even 4 years after handing the daily running of it to Gary, force of habit. The smell of fresh cut pine does something for a man that coffee never could. I stood with my foreman, a broad, quiet man named Otis Fenwick. 22 years working that yard. I picked up a length of green oak off the stack, weighed it in my hand the way I always do. "Little heavy for kiln-dried," I said. "Somebody's calling this seasoned when it's not." Otis grinned. "Nobody argues with your hands, Dale. They should learn to," I said. "Would save everybody a lot of grief." I meant lumber. I was also, if I'm honest, talking about my own family. Otis didn't know that. I didn't tell him. A man doesn't air his house on the mill floor. but I felt steadier standing there with sawdust under my boots than I had all night in that kitchen. Wood doesn't lie to you. It just tells you the truth in its own time. You either listen, or you build something that falls down later. That afternoon, from the little office in the back of the mill still officially mine, I made a phone call. Priscilla, it's Dale. Priscilla Landry has been our family's estate attorney 11 years. She drew up my will after Corinne got sick. 2 years before that, she drew up something else. Something almost nobody knows exists. Dale, she said, you sound like a man with a question. I found a brochure for a memory care place on my kitchen table last night. I told her. Somebody circled the price in red. There was a pause on her end. Not a long one. Priscilla doesn't do long pauses. That's part of why I trust her. Has anyone said anything to you directly? She asked. About your capacity, your memory, anything like that? Not directly, I said. Not yet. Then somebody's laying groundwork, she said. Dale, think back. Has Felicity mentioned her father lately? Dr. Kessler? I sat with that a second. Not by name, I said. Gary mentioned her dad was coming through town next month. Some kind of visit. Doctors don't usually visit family for no reason, Priscilla said. Not the same month a brochure with a circled price turns up on a kitchen table. Something settled in my chest. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling you get when a beam you already suspected was compromised finally shows you the crack. The trust, I said. It's still solid. The trust is airtight, Priscilla said. You funded it 2 years ago. You're sole trustee. Nobody but you and me and the county recorder even knows it exists. As long as nobody's forged your signature on anything since, there's nothing anyone can touch. 2 years before Corinne died, when she was still strong enough to sit at that kitchen table and argue with me about paperwork, she told me something I hadn't forgotten since. Dale, she'd said, setting down her reading glasses. I love that girl your son married. I do, but I've watched her count rooms in this house like she already owns them. Do something about the land before I'm not here to remind you. I did. I moved the Mills land, 110 acres, and the farmhouse on Persimmon Hill into a revocable trust. Myself as sole trustee. Filed quiet and proper at the county recorder's office in Marrow Falls. Corinne helped pick every clause. She was sharper about legal language than I ever gave her credit for while she was alive. I remember the exact afternoon we sat in Priscilla's office to sign it. The two of us on one side of the desk, Priscilla on the other, papers spread out between us like a hand of cards nobody else was allowed to see. You understand, Priscilla told us both that day? Once this is signed, Dale is the only person on earth who can move this land, sell this land, or sign this land away, until he chooses otherwise or passes it down himself. Not Gary. Not anyone Gary might marry, now or later. Just Dale. Good, Corinne said before I could even answer. That's exactly how it should stay. What if something happens to me first, I asked, since a man my age has to ask that question. Honestly. Then it passes to a successor trustee of your choosing, still not automatically to Gary, Priscilla explained. You could name Gary directly once he's proven himself capable of holding it responsibly, or you could name someone else entirely. That's your call whenever you're ready to make it. I'm not ready today, I said. Maybe not for years yet. That's your right, Priscilla said. The trust doesn't expire. It just waits for you to decide. Corinne reached over and took my hand across that desk, the way she did sometimes when she wanted to underline a point without needing to say the point out loud. I understood her meaning plain enough. We weren't protecting the mill from Gary that day. We were protecting it for him, until the day he'd earned the right to hold it the way I once had to earn the right to build it. There's one more thing, Priscilla said on the phone that day. Corinne left something in the folder. A note. She asked me to hold it until you needed it. I think you might need it soon. What kind of something? A note, Priscilla said. In her handwriting. Sealed. She was specific it wasn't to be opened until the right moment. She trusted me to know when that was. I sat in that little back office a long moment after we hung up, looking out through a window streaked with sawdust at the stacks of drying pine outside, thinking about my wife sitting at our table 2 years before she died, already seeing something coming that I hadn't wanted to look at straight on. That evening I drove out past the county line, the little cemetery behind the Baptist church where Corinne is buried. Under the oak, close enough to see the orchard from the fence line if you stand at just the right angle. I don't visit as often as I should. It never gets easier. Men my age tend to think that means we're doing something wrong. Really, it just means we love somebody enough that 2 years isn't long enough yet. They left a brochure on my table, I told her stone, for one of those places. The wind moved through the persimmon leaves behind me. I stood there another minute, feeling foolish the way a grown man does talking to granite. Then I drove home and didn't say a word to anybody about where I'd been. That night, back at the house, I sat up late in the kitchen, going through an old shoebox of photographs Corinne used to keep on the top shelf of the hall closet. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. There was a photograph of the two of us standing in front of the mill's very first stack of cut lumber, back when the whole operation was one shed and a single saw blade, taken by a neighbour with a camera that cost more than the saw did. Corinne was 26 in that photograph, hair pulled back, laughing at something just out of frame. I never did find out what she was laughing at. I never thought to ask her while I had the chance, and that's a regret I carry quiet, the way a man carries most of his regrets. There was another photograph further down, Gary at maybe 6 years old, standing on a stack of fresh-cut pine nearly as tall as he was, grinning like he owned the whole yard. Corinne used to bring him down to the mill on Saturdays so I could teach him the smell of good cedar against bad. My own father never got the chance to teach me anything. He died when I was 19, left me nothing but that flatbed truck I later borrowed to start the mill myself. I found myself thinking, sitting there with that shoebox in my lap, about how much of what I built was built for a boy who used to grin at me from the top of a lumber stack, and how far that boy had drifted from that grin by the time a glossy brochure showed up on my kitchen table, not through any real cruelty of his own, just through 39 years of being the softer half of a marriage to a woman who counted rooms before she ever counted her husband's character. I put the shoebox back on its shelf around midnight, sat a while longer with my coffee. I thought about the $11 Corinne and I had between us the week we married, and the $410,000 the mill would eventually clear in a single good year. Strange how both those numbers belong to the exact same marriage, the exact same 41 years, if you only knew how to add them up right. The next 2 weeks went quiet on the surface. Gary and Felicity acted normal, or what passes for normal in that house. Felicity was overly warm, asking after my appetite, asking if my knees were bothering me, asking twice in 1 week if I was sleeping all right. Concern that sounds like concern until you notice the pattern underneath it. I went to the bank in Marrow Falls that second week, moved some routine mill funds, nothing unusual. On my way in, a young loan officer I didn't recognise, new to the branch, stopped me near the entrance with a clipboard, some kind of routine customer survey the bank was running that month. "Sir, do you need help finding the right window today?" he asked, a little too slow, a little too loud, the way some young folks talk to anyone with grey hair regardless of whether the grey hair has earned it. "I've been banking at this branch since before you were born, son," I told him, plain, not unkind. "I believe I can find my own window." He flushed a little, embarrassed, and stepped aside, and I walked past him to Delia's window, same as I have for 19 years running. I didn't think much of it at the time, just another small moment of a world assuming an old man needs more help than he does. It was only weeks later, once everything else had surfaced, that I understood how many small moments like that one had been quietly stacking up around me for months, each one small enough to shrug off alone, all of them together forming exactly the kind of doubt somebody could build a guardianship petition on top of. Delia Pruitt has worked that teller window 19 years. She's known me since before Gary was born. "Dale," she said, sliding my deposit slip back across the counter. "How's Felicity's spa doing?" Gary mentioned she expanded last year. "Doing fine, far as I know," I said. "Careful. The way you learn to be careful once you suspect the ground under your feet has shifted." Delia lowered her voice. Not gossiping exactly. Just the way small-town people do when they think they're doing you a favour. Just, "We handle the note on that equipment loan. $92,000. Personally guaranteed against her and Gary's house. It's fallen a bit behind is all. 4 months now." I thanked her, walked out into the parking lot, stood by my truck a full minute before I got in. $92,000. Personally guaranteed. 4 months behind. A woman with a spa loan going sour. A father who's a doctor. A father-in-law who just lost his wife and still owns 110 acres of timberland outright. That's not a coincidence. That's a plan with a shape to it. Once you see the shape, you can't unsee it. That same week, a buyer from a construction outfit out of Little Rock came through the mill, wanting to negotiate a standing order for treated lumber, 8,000 board feet a month for a new subdivision going up outside the city. Gary sat in on the meeting, but it was me, the buyer, a sharp younger man named Foster Yancey, kept turning to when the numbers got specific. "Your son quoted me a price 12% under market," Yancey said to me, direct once Gary stepped out to take a call. "I want to know if that number's solid or if somebody's trying to buy volume they can't actually deliver." I looked over the order sheet Gary had drafted, and I found the error inside 90 seconds. The kind of thing you only catch if you've priced lumber contracts for 4 decades. Gary had figured the discount off last year's stumpage cost, not this year's, and stumpage had climbed 11% since spring. That number's about $4,100, a month short of where it needs to sit. I told Yancey, plain. "I'll have a corrected quote to you by tomorrow morning." Yancey looked at me a long moment, then nodded, satisfied in the particular way a careful businessman gets satisfied when he realizes he's dealing with someone who won't let a mistake slide just to close a deal. "Appreciate the honesty," Yancey said. "Most men would have let that ride and pocketed the difference quiet. That's not how I've run this mill 43 years, I told him, and it's not how I intend to start now." We signed the corrected contract 2 days later, $98,400 a year, and Gary thanked me afterward, a little sheepish for catching what he'd missed. "I'm not as sharp with the numbers as you are yet," Gary admitted, standing in the office doorway. "You will be," I told him, "if you keep checking your own work the way I just checked it for you. That's the whole trade, son. Not being right the first time, being willing to go back and find where you were wrong." I think about that exchange now, looking back, because it told me plainly that whatever softness Felicity had worked into my son over 9 years of marriage, the boy who used to grin at me from a lumber stack, was still under there somewhere, willing to be corrected, willing to learn. That mattered more to me in that moment than I let on to him at the time. It also told me something else. A man who still asks for correction, who still wants to get the number right, is not a man who conspired to put a brochure on his own father's kitchen table. Whatever was happening in that house, I became more certain that week that it was Felicity's plan alone, and Gary's only sin was not asking enough questions about where his wife's worry over my mind kept coming from. The same afternoon Yancey signed that lumber contract, an independent appraiser named Marlene Boyd came through the mill on unrelated business, contracted by the bank to reassess several commercial properties along the county line for a routine tax cycle. She'd appraised our mill twice before over the years, and she knew the property better than most. "Your North 40's grown up nicely since I was last out here, Dale," she said, walking the tree line with a tablet in hand, tapping notes as she went. "That stand of oak alone has probably added $110,000 to your total valuation since my last visit 5 years back." "That much," I said, surprised despite 40 years in the business. "Timber prices have climbed steady," she said, "and you've let that stand mature exactly right. Thinned it at the proper intervals instead of clear-cutting for a quick payday, like half the landowners in this county do. Whoever taught you patience with standing timber taught you something valuable." "Corinne taught me that, actually," I told her. "She used to say a tree left alone long enough always pays you back more than one you rush to the mill." Marlene smiled at that and made a note, and I thought little of the exchange at the time beyond simple pride in land well tended. It was only weeks later, once I needed every piece of evidence I could gather for that Friday dinner, that I remembered Marlene's visit and asked Priscilla whether an independent appraiser's recent notes might carry weight alongside everything else. They could, Priscilla told me. An unbiased third party confirming the land's value and your continued sound management, dated close to the time in question, only strengthens the picture. I'll reach out to her office. Marlene agreed without hesitation to provide a written statement confirming she'd found the property in excellent order and myself entirely lucid and engaged during her visit. One more small brick in a wall that was quietly becoming impossible for anyone to knock down. I drove home slower than usual, working it through in my head the way I used to work through a bad batch of lumber, tracing back to find where the rot started. Somewhere along the way, Felicity had decided the fastest route out of a defaulted loan ran straight through my land. The only obstacle was an old man everyone assumed would eventually get too foggy to notice. I drove past Felicity's spa on the way home that evening, a converted storefront on the square in Marrow Falls, with gold lettering on the window, reading Radiant Stay, Spa and Wellness. I'd never once gone inside, Had no reason to, but I slowed the truck enough to notice the parking lot was near empty on a Thursday afternoon. Only 2 cars where I remembered, from a grand opening 2 summers back, there being nearly 20. I mentioned it to Delia the next time I stopped by the bank. Careful the way you mention something you're not entirely sure you should be asking about. Business looked slow over at the spa yesterday, I said, half a question. Delia glanced around before answering. The way she does when she's about to say something she'd rather Felicity never learn, she said. Been slow for a while now, Dale. She overextended when she took that loan. Added 2 treatment rooms and a whole retail line nobody in this county was really asking for. Rent alone on that space runs her $2,200 a month, and she's barely covering half of it most months from what her deposits look like. $2,200 a month, I repeated, filing the number away the same as I filed everything else that fall. I probably shouldn't have told you that, Delia said. You've told me the truth, I said. That's never something to apologise for, Delia. Not in my book. I understood driving home that evening that Felicity wasn't simply worried about a loan coming due. She was standing in the middle of a business that had been bleeding money for 2 years, watching the walls close in a little further every month. Somewhere in that slow squeeze, she'd decided an old widower's 110 acres looked less like theft and more like rescue. If only she could convince herself, and everyone else, that I no longer needed it as badly as she did. She hadn't counted on the fact that I read wood for a living. Wood tells you the truth whether you want to hear it or not. So does a red circle on a glossy brochure. That Sunday, Gary mentioned again, almost too casually, that Felicity's father was coming through the following month. Dr. Kessler wants to see how you're doing, Dad, Gary said. Not quite meeting my eyes. Felicity thought maybe we could all have dinner. Kind of a family thing. Sounds nice, I said. Meant almost none of it the way he thought I meant it. That same week, my neighbour Hollis Adair stopped by the fence line while I was out checking the orchard. Hollis has farmed the acreage next to mine for 30-some years. He's the kind of man who notices things and says them plain. Dale, he said, leaning on the rail, saw Felicity's car out here twice last week while you were at the mill. Didn't think much of it till I saw a fellow with a clipboard get out with her the second time. A clipboard, I said. Looked like he was measuring something, Hollis said. Walked the tree line down by the creek. Took some photographs. I thanked him and didn't say much more, but I filed it away the same as I'd filed the brochure. Somebody measuring my land before they owned a single acre of it told me exactly how confident Felicity already felt about her plan. I called Priscilla that evening with that piece too. Surveyors don't usually walk a property line for fun, Priscilla said. That sounds like someone getting ready to refinance land they don't yet control, possibly to cover the loan before it comes due. That's exactly what I was thinking, I said. I want you to keep a log, Priscilla told me. Dates, what you see, what people say to you. Nothing dramatic. Just plain facts, written down as they happen. If this ever needs a timeline is what wins. I bought a small spiral notebook that week at the hardware store in Marrow Falls for $1.79, and I started writing things down the way she asked. The brochure, the red circle, the surveyor Hollis had seen. Every small thing, dated in my own hand, same steady hand I'd used to sign 43 years of mill invoices. A few days later, I drove past the old high school on my way back from the bank, and I found myself thinking about the summer Corinne and I got married. 50 years back come next June, though she didn't live to see the anniversary. We had $11 between us the week we married, and a rented room over the hardware store that's still standing on Main Street to this day. I proposed to her with a ring I'd made the band for myself out of scrap brass off a job site, because a real ring was $80 I didn't have, and she wore that brass band for 6 months until I could afford a proper one. She never once complained about the $11 or the rented room, or the years after that where the mill ate every spare dollar we had before it finally started paying us back. That's the woman these people wanted me to forget mattered. That's the woman whose orchard they were measuring for a subdivision, if that's what the survey turned out to mean. I stopped by the mill office that afternoon and pulled out the old ledger books, the paper ones Corinne kept by hand for decades, before we ever had a computer to do it for us. I found the entry from our 3rd year in business, the year we nearly lost the whole operation to a bad contract with a lumber broker out of Little Rock, who stiffed us on a shipment worth $6,400, money we didn't have to lose. Corinne had written a note in the margin that year, in pencil, faded now but still legible. We'll get it back, one board at a time if we have to. And we did. Took us 3 years, but we got every dollar of it back, one contract at a time, because neither of us knew how to quit on something we built with our own hands. I thought about that margin note a long while, sitting in that back office with the smell of pine dust in the air. A woman who fought that hard for $6,000 40 years ago would not have taken kindly to this. Her son's wife trying to walk off with 110 acres and a mill worth near $2 million, using nothing but a brochure and a doctor's signature. I put the old ledger back on the shelf, careful the way you handle something that still matters. The next morning, Otis found me standing at the edge of the yard, looking out toward the tree line where Hollis said the surveyor had walked. "You look like a man working something over," Otis said. "I am," I told him. "Otis, if anybody ever comes around here asking about property lines or timber value or anything to do with this land, I want you sending them straight to me. Nobody else. Somebody already asked," he said. "Not a question, really." "Somebody's about to," I said. "I want to be ready when they do." Otis nodded slow, the way he does when he's decided not to ask more than a man's willing to tell him. That's another thing I've always trusted about Otis. He knows the difference between curiosity and nosiness, and he only ever indulges the first one. Before I called her back, I sat a while at my kitchen table with that same spiral notebook Priscilla had told me to keep, and I wrote down everything I'd learned so far in one column. Dated, plain, the way Corinne used to line up figures before she'd trust a single one of them. Brochure found, red circle, $4,100. Surveyor seen on the property, by Hollis. A father who's a physician, coming through town the same month. Otis's story about his own father, put away against his will. I looked at that list a long while and I thought about how a man could read every single line of it separately and still talk himself into believing it was nothing, a coincidence, a worried family doing its best. It was only once you set every line beside every other line that the shape of it finally became impossible to unsee, the way a bad weld only shows itself once you know exactly where along the seam to press. I called Priscilla again that night. "They're planning a dinner," I told her. "Felicity's father, the doctor. Some kind of family evening." "Dale," Priscilla said, her voice gone careful in a way I recognised from watching her handle bad news for other clients over the years. "I did some checking after we last spoke. Felicity filed paperwork with the county 3 weeks ago, a petition for guardianship. It names you." I sat with the phone against my ear a long moment, looking out my kitchen window at the same table where the brochure had sat. "On what grounds?" I finally said. "A supporting letter from a physician alleging cognitive decline," Priscilla said. "Dr. Kessler's name is on the draft. It hasn't been filed with the court yet. Only prepared. Which tells me they're planning to have him examine you first, probably at this dinner, to make it look voluntary. Then file the petition with his letter attached. Likely a power of attorney they'll ask you to sign that same night, framed as something routine." "So the dinner isn't a dinner," I said. "The dinner is a trap," Priscilla said. "A polite one, but a trap all the same." "Walk me through what happens if it works," I said. "I want to understand the whole shape of it before Friday." Priscilla's voice went into what I'd come to think of as her courtroom register, flat and thorough. "If Dr. Kessler examines you Friday night and writes even an informal note suggesting concern, Felicity files the guardianship petition Monday morning with that note attached. The court schedules a hearing, usually within 30 to 45 days. In the meantime, if you've signed any power of attorney at that dinner, even a limited one, she could argue it shows you yourself recognise the need for help managing your affairs. That argument alone can carry real weight with a judge who's never met you." "And if I don't sign anything?" I asked. "Then she's relying entirely on Kessler's letter and her own testimony," Priscilla said. "Weaker, but not nothing. Judges take capacity claims seriously, Dale, because sometimes they're true, and a court doesn't want to be the reason a vulnerable person gets exploited. That's exactly why this tactic works as often as it does. It borrows the shape of real protection to disguise a land grab." "What stops it cold?" I asked. "Two things," Priscilla said. "A trust that predates any claim of decline by 2 full years, professionally drafted and properly filed, and a treating physician of your own, with a long relationship to you, willing to state under oath that he's found no decline whatsoever across that same period. Between those two things, Dale, there's no petition left standing. It collapses on its own weight before a judge ever needs to rule on it. That's why Farrow's letter matters as much as the trust does, I said. That's exactly why, Priscilla said. One document proves the past was sound, the other proves the present still is. Together they close the door on the whole scheme before it opens. I sat with that a long while after we hung up, turning it over the way I'd turn a length of oak in my hands, feeling for where the grain ran true and where it might split under pressure. Every piece I needed was already in place. The trust, filed 2 years back, on my late wife's own instinct. Farrow's 11 years of clean exams. The receipt Otis had found by accident. All I had left to do was decide exactly how and where and in front of whom to lay it all out at once. I didn't sleep well that night. Not from fear, I want to be clear about that. From the particular kind of alertness a man gets when he finally understands the exact size and shape of a problem he's been circling for weeks. I lay there beside the empty side of the bed where Corinne used to sleep. I thought about the note sealed in that trust folder, the one she'd left without telling me what it said. I thought, not for the first time, that my wife had seen this exact night coming 2 years before I did. Around 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep entirely and sat in the dark kitchen with the light off, just the porch bulb outside throwing a little yellow across the table. I thought about the $81,000 Felicity still owed on that spa lease, once the equipment notes and the build-out loan got added together. Honest, a figure Delia had let slip in pieces over 3 separate conversations, without ever meaning to hand me the whole sum at once. I thought about how a woman drowning in a number like that stops seeing an old man's land as somebody else's life's work and starts seeing it only as the exact size of the hole she's standing in. That doesn't excuse what she did. It only explains the shape of it, same as a bad splice in a power line explains a fire without excusing the man who ran it. I sat there until the sky started going grey behind the ridge, and then I got up, same as always, and went to grade lumber, because a man's hands don't get to stop working just because his heart's had a rough night. Monday morning, I drove into Marrow Falls, sat across the desk from Priscilla Landry in her office above the hardware store on Main Street. I want the trust recorded publicly before that dinner, I told her. Not hidden anymore. On the record. Where the county clerk, the bank, anyone else who asks can see it plainly. That's already true, Dale, Priscilla said. It's been recorded 2 years. What you mean is you want it acknowledged. Brought into the light where they can't pretend it doesn't exist. That's exactly what I mean. There's something else, she said. She opened a drawer, took out a plain white envelope, sealed, my name written across the front in handwriting I would know anywhere in this world. Upright and careful, my late wife's hand. She asked me to give you this when the moment came, Priscilla said. I think this is the moment. I turned that envelope over in my hands the same way I'd turned the brochure over 3 weeks before, except this time my hands weren't quite steady. I'm not ashamed to say so. Not yet, I said. I put it in my jacket pocket, close to my chest. I want to open it at the right table, in front of the right people. She'd have wanted an audience for this, knowing her. Priscilla almost smiled. She was sharper than any of us gave her credit for. She was sharper than all of us combined, I said, and I include myself in that. We spent the next hour going over exactly what the trust said, line by line, so there'd be no confusion at the table when the moment came. Gary and Felicity had signing authority on the mill's operating account, the one that covered payroll and day-to-day supplies. But every dollar of that account, every dollar in the trust itself, traced back to my sole authority as trustee. $280,000 sat in the operating account alone. The mill itself, land and building and equipment together, appraised 11 months back at just over $1.9 million. None of it, not $1, not 1 acre, belonged to Gary or Felicity outright. It only ever looked like it did. I'd let them run the daily business of it for 4 years out of trust, out of love, and maybe a little tiredness on my part. Priscilla laid out 3 separate folders across her desk that afternoon, each one labelled in her own neat hand. The first held the original trust documents, notarized and stamped by the county recorder 2 years back. The second held Dr. Farrow's letter, 1 page, plain language, no hedging. The third held the receipt Otis had found, along with copies of the fresh appraisal from the safe deposit box and a short written timeline Priscilla had built from my own spiral notebook, dated entry by dated entry, showing exactly when the brochure appeared when the surveyor walked my property line, and when the guardianship petition was quietly drafted. 3 folders, she said. That's all we'll need. One proves the past was sound. One proves the present still is. One proves intent. Together there's no argument left standing on their side of the table. What if they bring more than we expect? I asked. What if there's something we haven't found yet? Then we adjust, Priscilla said, calm the way she always is. But Dale, in 11 years of doing this work, I've learned that people who build a scheme this way rarely have a second plan waiting behind the first one. They spend all their effort making the first plan look natural. It rarely occurs to them somebody might see through it before it lands. I hope you're right, I told her. I usually am, about this part of the work at least, Priscilla said. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to steady standing in that office. 3 folders thick with 2 years of quiet preparation, sitting between us like a hand of cards. I already knew I was going to win. They think they're 1 signature away from all of it, Priscilla said. They have no idea they're actually 0 signatures away, and have been for 2 years. Let them think what they think, I said, until the dinner tells them different. The following 2 weeks I went about my life the way I always do. I graded lumber with Otis. I ate my dinners at that kitchen table, brochure long since folded away in my receipts drawer as evidence. I let Felicity ask after my appetites and my knees and my sleep. I answered every question, calm and short, the way I answer everything. A man who seems rattled invites more digging. A man who seems steady invites doubt in the diggers instead. Otis and I have worked side by side 22 years, and in all that time, I've never once had to wonder whose side he was on. He came to me at 19, fresh out of the army, no family left in this county worth mentioning, and I gave him a job stacking green lumber for $6 an hour, back when $6 an hour was still a fair wage for a young man learning a trade. He worked his way up to foreman inside 11 years, and I paid him $78,000 last year, more than fair for a county like ours, because a man who's earned your trust for 2 decades has earned every dollar of it twice over. One afternoon that week, while we were stacking a fresh cut of cedar, Otis brought up his own father. Unprompted, the way men do sometimes when something's sitting heavy on another man's mind and they want to offer company without prying directly into it. My old man got put in a home against his will, Otis said, not looking up from the stack. 2 of my sisters did it. Said he was a danger to himself living alone. Maybe he was some. But nobody asked him. Just decided it, signed it, and moved him inside a month. I'm sorry to hear that, Otis, I said. He died 8 months later, Otis said. Not from anything wrong with his mind. Just from being somewhere he didn't choose to be, around people who didn't know him, doing nothing all day that mattered to him. I've always believed that killed him faster than his body would have on its own. I didn't say much in response, but I understood, hearing that story, exactly why Otis had frowned so hard the day he found that receipt mixed into the mill's invoices. He knew, better than most men in this county, exactly what a nursing home brochure with a circled price could mean for a man like me if the people around him decided the choice wasn't mine to make. 3 days before the planned dinner, Otis pulled me aside at the mill, frowning over something on his phone. Dale, you seen this? He turned the screen toward me. A printout of a receipt. The kind Felicity's spa used for supply orders. It had gotten mixed into a stack of the mill's own invoices by mistake. Some paperwork mix-up between the 2 businesses, since Felicity used the mill's shared printer sometimes. It was a receipt from an office supply store in Marrow Falls. Restful Pines senior living brochures, ordered in a pack of 10, glossy stock, paid for on a card ending in the same 4 digits as Felicity's spa business account. There it was, proof plain as anything that the brochure hadn't wandered into my kitchen by accident. Somebody had planned it, ordered it, paid for it, left it exactly where I'd find it, hoping I'd read that $4,100 figure and start believing on my own that maybe it was time. I didn't say much to Otis, just, keep that safe for me, would you? He nodded, understanding more than he let on, the way good men who've worked beside you 2 decades tend to. I called Priscilla that same afternoon, told her what we'd found. That's not just groundwork anymore, she said. That's evidence of intent, combined with the guardianship filing and Dr. Kessler's draft letter. That paints a very specific picture for a judge, if it ever gets that far. It won't get that far, I said. It ends at my table Friday night. That weekend, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote out plain every dollar figure that mattered to this whole story, the way Corinne used to do every December before tax season, balancing the Mills year on a single page before handing it to the accountant. The Mills land and buildings, appraised at $1,900,000. The equipment alone, 3 planers, 2 head rigs, a kiln system I'd installed myself 12 years back, worth another $210,000 on top of that. The operating account, $280,000. Untouchable now that the trust stood between it and anyone but me. My personal savings, built slow over 4 decades, sitting at just under $600,000 across 3 separate accounts, split the way Priscilla had advised years ago, so no single bank ever held more than what federal insurance would fully cover. The farmhouse itself, appraised separately at $140,000, modest next to the Mills numbers, but the only figure on that page that had ever truly meant something to Corinne, since it was the one asset she'd helped build with her own hands, rather than simply her ledger skills. Against all of that, I wrote down what Felicity and Gary actually owned outright. Their house, worth roughly $180,000, with $61,000 still owed on the mortgage. The spa lease, worth nothing. A liability, if anything, given the equipment loan sitting on top of it. 2 cars financed, worth maybe $30,000, combined against $22,000 still owed between them. I sat with that page a long while, the numbers laid out plain in my own handwriting. And I understood something I hadn't let myself say out loud yet, even to Priscilla. Felicity wasn't trying to steal from a rich old fool who wouldn't notice the loss. She was trying to save herself from a financial hole entirely of her own digging, using the one asset in her orbit large enough to cover it. That didn't excuse what she'd done, it just explained it. The way understanding a bad weld doesn't make the weld safe to trust. It just tells you where exactly it's going to fail. I folded that page and put it with the other papers I intended to bring to Friday's dinner. Not because I planned to read the numbers aloud, but because I wanted them close. The way you want a level close by even when you're fairly sure the wall's already straight. Before the dinner, though, there was one more thing I needed to check. Priscilla mentioned it almost in passing, the way important things sometimes slip out sideways in a conversation about something else entirely. There's a safe deposit box, Priscilla said, tied to the original trust filing. Corinne's name is on the access list alongside yours. Have you ever opened it since you passed? I hadn't. Truth be told, I'd forgotten it existed. The way grief makes you forget the practical corners of a life you built with somebody. For 41 years. I drove into the bank in Marrow Falls that Wednesday, 2 days before the dinner, and sat with Delia while the branch manager walked the box out to a private room. Take your time, Dale, Delia said, closing the door soft behind her. Inside the box, along with the original trust documents and a copy of Corinne's will, I found a second sealed envelope, smaller than the one Priscilla had already given me, with just one word written across the front, in Corinne's hand. Gary. I sat there a long moment looking at my son's name in his mother's handwriting, and I did not open it. That one wasn't mine to open. I put it back exactly where I found it, closed the box and told Delia I'd be back for it another day. I also found, tucked into a smaller compartment at the bottom of the box, a folded newspaper clipping from 31 years back, the announcement of Boone Ridge Lumber, and Mill winning the county's Small Business Award. That year, a photograph of Corinne and me standing in front of the mill office, both of us younger than I could quite remember being. Corinne had written a single line beneath the clipping in pencil. Keep this close on hard days. Remind yourself what patience built. I sat with that clipping a long while, in that small private room with its single table and its single chair. Strange that my wife had somehow anticipated hard days still coming for me, even after she was gone, and had left me exactly the kind of quiet reminder she always knew how to leave. Not dramatic, not a speech, just a fact and a photograph, enough to steady a man's hand when he needed steadying most. I folded the clipping carefully, slid it into my jacket pocket, alongside the envelope Priscilla had already given me. 2 pieces of my late wife's handwriting, riding together over my heart. I walked back out into the Marrow Falls afternoon feeling, for the first time in weeks, like I was carrying exactly what I needed, and nothing more. I stopped at the mill on my way home, just to stand in the yard a minute. Otis was closing up for the day, running a rag over the head rig, same as he does every evening before he leaves. Found something at the bank, I told him. Good or bad, he asked. Both, I said. A letter for Gary I'm not opening, And a photograph of Corin and me the year we won the county's business award. Otis nodded slow. That's the two kinds of thing a safe deposit box usually holds, Dale. The part that's not yours yet, and the part that reminds you why any of it mattered in the first place. You've got a philosopher's mouth on you for a mill foreman, I told him. 22 years watching you work, he said, grinning. Some of it rubs off eventually. He locked the yard gate behind us both. Same routine we've run 1,000 evenings running. And I drove home with that clipping riding in my pocket, thinking about how a photograph 31 years old could still carry more weight than any dollar figure I'd written down that same week. There was also folded flat at the bottom of the box, a second copy of the property appraisal, dated fresh, only 4 months old, showing the mill's total value had climbed to just over $1.9 million, once a new stand of mature timber on the north 40 acres was factored in. I hadn't ordered that appraisal. Someone had, recently, and the only person with both the motive and the access to request one quietly was Felicity, likely as part of whatever refinancing scheme the surveyor Hollis had spotted was meant to support. That confirmed it for me. This wasn't a woman worried about my mind, this was a woman pricing out my land. I sat with the appraisal a long moment before I put it back exactly where I found it. $1.9 million. My whole working life, reduced to a single number on a single page, sitting in a box somebody else had already been quietly measuring for a purpose that had nothing to do with love. I've built things my whole life, I said out loud, to nobody in that small private room. Nobody gets to price one of them out from under me without my say. I meant it plain. I still mean it now. I drove back into Marrow Falls that same afternoon and stopped, on a hunch I couldn't quite name yet, at the county recorder's office instead of straight home. A clerk named Wanda Pruitt, Delia's cousin as it happens, in a town this size, everybody's somebody's cousin, pulled the recent filing log for me without much fuss. Once I explained I had reason to believe someone had requested copies of my property records. Somebody did pull your file, Dale, she said, running a finger down the log. 3 weeks back. Listed the requesting party as Radiant Stay Spa and Wellness, citing a refinancing inquiry. That's a business entity, not a person. Which is a little unusual for a residential land record request, but it's not against any rule I know of. A business, I repeated, not a person. Companies pull deed records sometimes when they're exploring using land as collateral for a loan, even land they don't own outright yet. Wanda said. Happens more than you'd think when somebody's trying to get ahead of a refinance before the paperwork's actually settled. Usually it's harmless, sometimes it isn't. I thanked her and drove home with that piece sitting alongside everything else. Another small stone added to a wall that was quickly becoming too tall for anyone to climb over and pretend it wasn't there. A spa business, not a woman worried about her father-in-law's memory, requesting the deed to land she didn't own. 3 weeks before a doctor was set to examine me at my own dinner table. I called Priscilla from the truck before I'd even left the parking lot. That's the clearest piece yet, she said, once I'd walked her through it. A business entity pulling deed records to explore using unowned land as loan collateral isn't confusion about an old man's health. That's financial planning around an asset she expects to control soon. I'll have Wanda's office send over a certified copy of that request log. It'll sit nicely alongside the receipt and the print records. Add it to the stack, I told her. Folders getting thick. Thick folders win quiet, Priscilla said. That's usually how the honest side of a fight looks, right before it wins loud enough for everyone to hear it. Priscilla called me back 2 days after I told her about the appraisal, her voice carrying the particular satisfaction of a lawyer who's just closed the last gap in a case. I had someone check the printer records at the mill office, she said. The kind of thing that sounds intrusive, but it's all logged automatically. Every job, every account. The brochure order matches a print session run from the shared network the same afternoon Felicity was in that office, alone, according to the mill's own visitor sign-in sheet, which Otis apparently still keeps by hand at the front desk, out of old habit. So it's not circumstantial anymore, I said. It was never really circumstantial, Priscilla said. But now it's documented 3 separate ways. The purchase record, the print log, the sign-in sheet, 3 independent trails all pointing at the same afternoon, the same person, the same intention. I sat with that a long moment, feeling something settle in my chest that I can only describe as a kind of tired relief. The feeling a man gets when a suspicion he's been carrying alone for weeks finally becomes something solid enough to set down on a table in front of other people. I keep thinking about how close this came to working, I told Priscilla. If Otis hadn't caught that receipt by accident, if I hadn't called you the first night, if Corinne hadn't insisted on that trust 2 years before any of us saw this coming. That's exactly why people build protection early, Dale, Priscilla said. Not because they expect the worst, because by the time the worst arrives, it's already too late to build anything from scratch. Your wife understood that better than most clients I've had in 11 years of this work. She usually did, I said. Understand things before the rest of us caught up. One more thing, Priscilla added. Before we hang up, I want to walk you through exactly how I plan to present this Friday, so nothing catches you off guard at the table. Go ahead, I said. I'll let Kessler ask his question first, she said. Let him show the room what he came to do. Then I'll open with the trust, plain and factual. The filing date first, so there's no room to argue timing. Then the receipt, since it establishes intent, which matters more to a family than any legal document ever could. I'll save Corinne's letter for you to read yourself. That part isn't mine to deliver. That part belongs to you and her. That sounds right, I said. And Dale, she added, her voice softening slightly from its usual courtroom register. Whatever happens at that table Friday, you've already won this. The trust made sure of that 2 years ago. Everything happening Friday is just making sure everyone else in that room finally understands it too. I appreciate you saying that, I told her. That's not comfort, Priscilla said. That's fact. I don't deal much in the other kind. We hung up not long after, and I sat at my kitchen table a long while. The same table where the brochure had first appeared. Thinking that in 3 days' time, that table was finally going to tell the truth, back to the people who tried to use it against me. I drove back to the mill that Wednesday afternoon and sat with Priscilla by phone one more time, wanting to walk through every possible way Friday night could go wrong before it happened. The same way I used to walk a job site 3 times before pouring a single yard of concrete. What if Kessler refuses to back down once he sees the trust, I asked. What if he pushes forward with the exam regardless? Then we let him, Priscilla said. An exam he administers under those circumstances, informed of a validated trust and a competing physician's letter, carries almost no legal weight afterward. If anything, pushing forward at that point would only make his own judgment look worse. Not yours. What if Felicity gets angry, tries to leave the table before Corinne's letter gets read? Let her leave if she wants to, Priscilla said. The trust stands whether she's sitting at the table or not. The letter matters to you and Gary, not to the legal outcome. Don't chase her for a reaction, Dale. The facts don't need her permission to be true. And Gary, I asked. What if he sides with her in the moment, out of habit, the way he sometimes does? Then you'll know something important about where things actually stand between you two, Priscilla said, gentler than her usual tone. But from everything you've told me about that phone call Thursday night, I don't think that's the son you're about to see Friday. I hope you're right, I told her again. I generally am about this part, she said, and we both allowed ourselves something close to a laugh, small and brief, the kind two people share right before walking into something neither of them can fully control. One more call came in that Wednesday evening, after Priscilla and I had already hung up. Marlene Boyd, the appraiser, phoning to confirm her written statement was ready. Signed and dated, she said. I found the property in excellent order, and you in full command of every detail of it. That's the plain truth, Dale. Same as I'd have said it to any judge who asked me directly. I appreciate you putting your name on that, Marlene, I told her. Wasn't hard, she said. I've appraised 100 properties in this county. Yours has always been the best kept land I've walked. That's not flattery. That's just what my own notes show. Going back 15 years. I hung up and sat a moment with that. One more voice added to a chorus that was quickly becoming loud enough to drown out anything Felicity's father might try to say across my own table. Thursday night, the evening before the dinner, Felicity knocked on my study door, around 9, holding 2 cups of tea, which she almost never did. Thought you might want company, she said, setting a cup down in front of me. I let her sit. I wanted to see what she'd say, now that the trap was nearly sprung in her own mind. Dad, she said, careful, testing each word, have you thought at all about maybe simplifying things? The house, the land, all of it. It's a lot for one person to manage alone now that Corinne's gone. I manage it fine, I said, sipping the tea. Calm as ever. Same as I have for 43 years. She smiled, the same careful smile from the anniversary dinner. Of course, she said. I just worry sometimes. You seem tired lately. I am tired, I said, which was true. though not for the reason she was hoping. Tired of watching people I love get led around by whoever speaks loudest in a room. She sat with that a moment, her smile flickering just slightly, the way it had at the dinner table months before. "I only want what's best for this family, Dad," she said. "My father says sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is help them see clearly, even if they don't want to see it themselves." "Your father seems like a man with a lot of opinions about seeing clearly," I said. Still calm, still no heat in it. "I look forward to meeting him properly tomorrow night." "He's looking forward to it too," she said, and something in the way she said it, a little too bright, a little too rehearsed, told me she believed tomorrow's dinner was already decided in her favour. "I hope everyone gets exactly the clarity they're looking for," I told her, and left it right there, watching her try to decide whether that sentence had been a comfort or a warning, and settling finally on comfort. Because that's what she needed to believe walking into Friday night. She didn't quite know what to do with that answer, and she left not long after, taking her tea with her, mostly untouched. I sat alone in that study a long while, thinking about the appraisal in the safe deposit box, and the surveyor Hollis had seen, and the brochure with its red circle. And I understood, plain as reading grain in a board, exactly what tomorrow's dinner was actually for. The dinner was set for Friday, 7 o'clock, at the house on Persimmon Hill. My house, the one I built with lumber off my own mill, the one Corinne had planted her orchard behind. Felicity had insisted on cooking, which she rarely did. She'd asked, almost sweetly, if her father could just stop by to say hello while they were all together. I told Priscilla I wanted her there too, not hiding in a car outside, not waiting for a phone call. Sitting at my table, invited, the same as anyone else, holding a folder of her own. "Are you sure?" she asked. It might feel confrontational to them, a lawyer showing up unannounced to family dinner. "They're the ones who brought a doctor," I said. "I'm allowed to bring a lawyer." The Thursday night before the dinner, I called Gary alone, without Felicity on the line, wanting to give him one honest chance to hear the truth from me before it landed in front of everyone else the following evening. "Son," I said, "I need to ask you something plain, and I need a plain answer." "All right," he said, sounding wary already, the way a man sounds when he suspects the question is going to cost him something. "Did you know your wife ordered 10 brochures from a nursing home?" I asked. "Did you know she filed papers with the county calling me confused?" There was a long silence on his end, long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. "I didn't know about the filing," he finally said, voice tight. "I swear to you, Dad, I didn't know that part. I knew she was worried about you. I didn't know she'd gone and done something like that behind both our backs." "I believe you," I told him, and I meant it. "But tomorrow night, some things are going to come out at that table that you're not going to like hearing. I want you to know ahead of time that none of it is aimed at you. It's aimed at protecting what your mother and I built, and it's aimed at telling the truth in a room that's been avoiding it for months." "Is Mum's letter part of it?" he asked. Quiet. "Part of it," I said. "I'm not going to tell you more than that tonight. Tomorrow you'll hear all of it, same as everyone else." "Okay," he said, and then, after a pause, "Dad, whatever happens tomorrow, I'm still your son. I want you to know that, no matter how it lands." "I know that, Gary," I told him. "That's never once been in question, not for me." I sat on the porch a long while after that call, looking out over the orchard in the last of the daylight, thinking about how strange it is that a father can love a son completely and still watch him make choices that nearly cost them everything. Corinne used to say love and good judgment don't always travel together in the same man, especially not a young one still learning the difference between kindness and being used. I hoped, sitting there that evening, that my son was finally close to learning it. Friday morning I woke early, same as always, and I drove out to the cemetery before I even opened the mill. "Tonight's the night," I told Corinne Stone. "I've got your letter with me. I've got the trust. I've got Farrow's letter too. I think I've got everything covered that you'd have wanted covered." The wind moved through the persimmon leaves, same as it always does, and I stood there a while, feeling steadier than I had in weeks, the way a man feels once a long-dreaded thing finally has a date and a time attached to it, instead of just hanging out there formless in the future. Friday came clear and cool, the kind of early autumn evening that used to make Corinne want to sit on the porch with her tea until the light went orange over the persimmon trees. I put on a clean shirt. The blue one she always said brought out my eyes, though I've never seen it myself. I put Corinne's sealed envelope in my jacket pocket over my heart, where I'd carried it every day since Priscilla handed it to me. Priscilla arrived first at 6:45 in a grey suit, carrying a slim leather folder. I met her on the porch. "You ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for 43 years, I said. "This is just the day it finally matters." We stood together a moment on the porch, looking out over the orchard, while the last of the daylight went orange over the persimmon trees. Same colour Corinne used to wait for every evening of every autumn she was alive. She'd have liked watching this unfold, I said. Mostly to myself. I imagine she would have insisted on cooking the dinner herself just to make the moment sting a little sweeter, Priscilla said, and I found myself laughing. Quiet, for the first time in weeks. That she would have, I agreed. Corinne never did believe in serving justice on an empty stomach. Priscilla set her leather folder down on the porch rail and checked it once more, out of habit more than necessity, the same way I check a saw blade before every cut, even after 43 years of knowing it's sharp. "One more piece came in this morning," she added. "The deed request log from the county recorder. Certified copy. Wanda's office sent it over an hour ago." "Good," I said. "Add it." 4 folders now, Priscilla said. "Not 3. Thicker than I planned for." "Thick is fine," I told her. "Thick wins. Everything's here," she said. "The trust. Farrow's letter. The receipt. The timeline. Corinne's letter is still in your pocket." I take it. "Right here," I said, patting my jacket over my heart, where it had sat every day for 3 weeks running. "Then we're ready," Priscilla said, and picked her folder back up, and we walked into the house together, just as Gary's headlights swung up the drive, Felicity's father's car close behind him. Gary answered the door when Felicity's father arrived at 7 sharp. A tall, silver-haired man named Dr. Robert Kessler. Pleasant enough on the surface. The kind of pleasant that comes from decades of delivering hard news to strangers and learning to soften your face while you do it. "Dale," he said, shaking my hand. "Good to see you. Felicity's told me so much." "I imagine she has," I said. "Left it right there." He glanced past me, noticing Priscilla standing near the fireplace, and something flickered across his face. Quick. Gone almost before I caught it. "I didn't realise we'd have additional company tonight," he said. Pleasant still, but with an edge underneath the pleasantness now. "Priscilla's been a family friend a long time," I said. "Figured she'd enjoy the chicken same as the rest of us." "Of course," he said, recovering smooth, the way a man recovers who's spent 30 years learning to keep his face steady in front of frightened patients. The more the merrier. We moved into the dining room, Felicity fussing over place settings, Gary pouring water for everyone with the careful attention of a man trying hard not to look as nervous as he clearly felt. I took my usual seat at the head of the table, the same seat I'd sat in for every family dinner since I built that table with my own hands, the same summer Gary turned 10. We sat down to dinner. Roast chicken and potatoes Felicity had actually cooked herself. For the first 20 minutes it was almost pleasant, the way these evenings always start before anybody shows their real hand. Gary talked about the mill's fall orders. Felicity asked Priscilla polite questions about her practice. Careful. Testing the water. "The chicken's good, Felicity," I said, meaning it plainly, since I've never believed in withholding a true compliment just because a person's done something wrong elsewhere in their life. "Thank you, Dad," she said, and for a brief second something like real warmth crossed her face, the same warmth I remembered from years back, before Corinne's worry had ever entered the picture, before any of this had begun to take its shape. Gary mentioned the fall lumber orders were up 9% over last year, a genuinely good number, one I was proud of him for landing on his own, and for a moment the table felt almost like any other family dinner we'd shared across that same table for years, before any brochure, before any red circle, before any of it. "So, Priscilla," Felicity said, pouring more wine than the moment probably called for, "Dale mentioned you handle estate matters mostly. Do you find in your line of work that people sometimes hold on to more responsibility than they really should, later in life?" "An interesting way to put it," Priscilla said. "Mild, giving nothing away. I find people generally know their own capacity better than the people around them assume they do. My job is mostly making sure the paperwork reflects reality, whatever that reality happens to be." Felicity nodded slowly, like she'd filed that answer away for later use. "That's reassuring," she said. "I just think Sometimes families wait too long to have these conversations, until something forces the issue. Sometimes they do, Priscilla agreed, and left it exactly there, giving Felicity nothing more to build on. Dr. Kessler cleared his throat once, early, like a man testing whether the room was ready for him yet, then decided against speaking and reached instead for his water glass. Gary kept glancing between his wife and me, the way a man glances between two things he suspects are about to collide and has no idea how to stop. "How's the mill doing these days?" Dr. Kessler finally asked me, keeping his tone light. "Felicity tells me you've handed most of the daily work over to Gary now." "Mostly," I said. "I still keep an eye on the big decisions. Some habits don't retire easy after 43 years." "I imagine not," Kessler said, and smiled the careful smile of a man circling toward a question he'd already decided he was going to ask, one way or another, before the night was through. Felicity refilled my water glass without being asked. A small gesture, the kind of thing a person does when they want a room to remember them as gentle right before they do something that isn't. "You've always taken such good care of us, Dad," she said. "I hope you know how much we appreciate everything you've built here." "I do know it," I told her. "I've known exactly how much you've appreciated it for a while now." Something flickered across her face at that. Quick, there and gone, the way a shadow crosses a wall when a cloud passes outside a window. Nobody's looking at directly. Then Dr. Kessler set his fork down, cleared his throat. The exact gesture of a man about to deliver a diagnosis he'd rehearsed. "Dale," he said, "Felicity's mentioned some concerns to me. Memory lapses, some confusion about routine matters. I wonder if you'd be willing to let me ask a few simple questions, just to put everyone's mind at ease." The table went quiet. Gary stared at his plate. Felicity watched me with an expression I can only describe as careful hope. The look of somebody who's rehearsed this scene in her head 100 times and is watching to see if reality follows the script. "Before you do that," I said, calm, no heat in it at all, "I'd like Priscilla to say a few things first. If nobody minds." Felicity's face flickered. "Just for a second." "Priscilla," she said, "I didn't realize this was a legal matter." "It's a family matter," I said. "Priscilla's just here to make sure the family understands the facts." I reached into my jacket, set two things on the table. The trust folder, thick with 2 years of paperwork. Corinne's sealed envelope laid on top, her handwriting facing up where everyone could see it. For just a moment, before Priscilla opened the folder, the whole room seemed to hold its breath at once. Gary's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Felicity's hand tightened around her wineglass. Dr. Kessler leaned back slightly in his chair, the posture of a man sensing too late that the evening had already slipped out of the shape he'd planned for it. I thought, in that brief silence, about every quiet decision that had led to this exact moment. Corinne's warning at this same table 2 years back, Priscilla's careful paperwork, Otis's sharp eye catching a receipt by accident. A whole chain of small, patient choices, none of them loud, all of them adding up now to this single folder sitting square between the water glasses and the bread basket. I nodded once to Priscilla. "Go ahead, Priscilla," I said. She set her leather folder down flat on the table, unhurried, and opened it the way she'd probably opened 100 folders in 100 rooms just like this one, over 11 years of practicing this exact kind of quiet, patient law. Nobody at that table moved. Nobody breathed loud enough to notice they were doing it. Yeah. Even the ceiling fan overhead seemed to slow. Or maybe that was only me, noticing everything at once, the way a man notices everything in the 1 second before a saw blade finally bites true into a board he's been easing toward all morning. Priscilla opened the trust folder first. 2 years ago, she said. Voice level. The voice of someone who has done this exact thing in exact rooms like this one many times. Dale Boone established a revocable trust, naming himself sole trustee, and placed into it the entirety of the Boone Ridge lumber and mill property. 110 acres, the mill building and equipment, the farmhouse on Persimmon Hill. Neither Gary nor Felicity Boone has ever held ownership interest. As of this trust's terms, neither holds signing authority on the mill's operating account, effective as of tonight. That's not possible, Felicity said, her voice climbing. Gary's been running that business for 4 years. Running it, Priscilla said, is not the same as owning it. Dale never transferred ownership. He transferred responsibility, which he is fully within his rights to reclaim at any time, being of entirely sound mind and sole trustee of record. Dr. Kessler had gone very still. There's also this, Priscilla continued. She slid a photocopy across the table, the receipt Otis had found. The order for 10 glossy brochures from Restful Pines Senior Living, paid for on Felicity's spa business card 3 weeks before one of those brochures turned up, circled in red on Dale's kitchen table. The room went silent in the particular way. Rooms go silent when everyone at the table finally sees the same true shape at the same moment. I don't know what that is, Felicity said. Too fast. I do, I said. Quiet. The loudest I'd been all evening, which is to say not loud at all. You ordered 10 brochures, you circled the price on one and left it where I'd find it, hoping I'd start believing it myself before anyone had to say it out loud. That's not confusion, Felicity. That's a plan, and it's a plan that only works on a man who doesn't know what he's worth. I picked up Corinne's envelope, opened it there, at that table, in front of all of them, the way I'd decided weeks before that I would. Her handwriting filled a single page, upright and careful, the same hand that had balanced our books for 36 years. Dale, I read aloud, my voice steady though my hands were not. If anyone ever tells you that you're the one who's lost your way, hand them this and watch them go quiet. You built every board of that mill and every board of that house with your own 2 hands, and nobody who married into this family gets to decide when your hands stop being trustworthy. I love you. Don't you dare let them make you small. Corinne. Nobody at that table said a word for a long moment. Gary's eyes had gone wet, staring at his mother's handwriting, like it was the first honest thing he'd heard in months. Dr. Kessler folded his own hands together and looked for the first time all evening like a man reconsidering everything he'd walked in, ready to say. Felicity, I said, I want you to understand I said it gently, not cruel. Your loan is 4 months behind. $92,000, personally guaranteed against the house you and Gary live in. I know because the bank mentioned it in passing, same as they've mentioned plenty of routine things to me over 40 years of doing business with them. I don't say that to shame you. I say it because I think it's the real reason for that brochure, and I think somewhere in there you know it too. Felicity's face had drained of colour entirely. Her father set his hand briefly on her arm, not defending her, just steadying her. The way you steady someone who's just watched their own plan turn back on them in the open. Marlene Boyd's written statement is also on file with my attorney, Priscilla added. Quiet, factual, confirming the property's excellent condition and Dale's full engagement with its management as recently as 3 weeks ago. Independent, unrelated to this family, contracted by the bank itself for an unrelated tax matter. I mention it only because I suspect, had tonight gone differently, someone might eventually have questioned whether Dale was truly capable of managing land this valuable. Mrs. Boyd's assessment answers that question plainly, and it answers it in Dale's favour. Dr. Kessler nodded slowly, absorbing one more piece of a picture that had already become impossible to argue with. I'm not going to raise my voice, I said, because I never do, and because the moment didn't call for it. I'm not going to throw anybody out of this house tonight. I'm going to say plainly that as of this evening, the trust stands as it always has, recorded and unshakable, and that any petition filed with this county naming me will find a fully documented, sound-minded trustee waiting on the other side of it with 2 years of paperwork and his late wife's own handwriting behind him. I looked at Gary, softened, because whatever his wife had done, he was still my son, and Corinne's note hadn't been written for Felicity at all. It had been written for me, and maybe, in some smaller way, for him too. Gary, I said, you're not the one I'm angry with tonight. You're the one I'm disappointed in, which is a different thing, and it can be fixed if you decide you want it fixed. Gary didn't answer. He looked at his mother's handwriting on the table. Then he looked at his wife. Something in his face I hadn't seen in years, something like clarity, moved across it slow, the way morning light moves across a field. Priscilla closed the trust folder gently. The county records office confirmed the trust's filing date this afternoon, she said, to no one in particular, though everyone at the table heard it plainly, 2 years ago, 3 months before Corinne Boone's passing. There's no ambiguity about timing, and no ambiguity about capacity, given medical records from that period showing Dale in full health. Dr. Kessler stood, slow, The posture of a man exiting a situation he'd badly misjudged. Dale, he said. I apologise. I only agreed to this because Felicity told me you'd been declining. I should have examined the situation myself before signing anything. You should have, I agreed. No anger in it. Just fact. But I appreciate you saying so out loud. He turned to Felicity, his own daughter, before he gathered his coat. Felicity, he said. Quiet. You told me he'd been declining for months. You showed me examples. Was any of that true? Felicity didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on the photocopy of her own receipt, sitting there on the tablecloth, between the water glasses. Plain as anything. Undeniable in a way no amount of careful wording could talk around. I was scared, Dad, she finally said, her voice cracking for the first time all evening. The loan, the business, it all felt like it was collapsing. And I didn't know what else to do. You could have asked for help honestly, Dr. Kessler said. And I heard, underneath the disappointment in his voice, something that sounded almost like grief. The particular grief of a father realizing his daughter had built an entire scheme rather than simply say she was struggling. That would have cost you your pride. This has cost you a great deal more. He left within the hour. Quiet. His silver head bowed slightly as he walked to his car. Felicity sat frozen at the table a long while after, staring at the photocopy of her own receipt, at the trust folder, at Corinne's letter. Until finally she stood, said nothing, and went upstairs alone. Gary stayed at the table a moment longer, looking at me across the wreckage of a dinner that had started as a trap and ended as something closer to a reckoning. Dad, he finally said, I didn't know about the loan. I swear to you, I didn't know. I believe you, I said. That's the trouble with weak ground, son. You can build a whole house on it without ever checking what's underneath, right up until the day it gives. I want to tell you what happened after that dinner. The paperwork side of a story like mine doesn't end at a table. It only starts there. Monday morning, Priscilla drove to the county recorder's office herself. She filed formal notice confirming the trust. Gary's name and Felicity's name came off every signing authority connected to Boone Ridge Lumber and Mill. Effective immediately. She called me at 11 that morning to confirm it was done. It's recorded, Dale, she said. Clean. Nobody can argue timing on this one. 2 years old, filed proper, notarized proper. Good, I said. Now the petition. I'm sending a certified letter to the county family court this afternoon, she said, withdrawing any basis for Felicity's guardianship filing before it's ever formally lodged. I'm attaching 3 things: the receipt, the trust's filing date, and a signed letter from your own physician. Dr. Farrow, I said. 11 years he's treated you, Priscilla said. He'll confirm you passed every cognitive screening he's ever run. No findings of decline. Not one. I drove out to Dr. Aldous Farrow's little clinic on Route 9 that same afternoon, just to sit across from him and ask the question plain. You really willing to put your name on a letter for this? I asked him. Dale, Farrow said, leaning back in his chair. I've been testing your memory and your reflexes every single visit for 11 years running. You remember 3 words and a date better than my own receptionist does. I'll sign whatever tells the truth. That's all a letter like this ever needs to say. He wrote it out right there. 1 page. Plain language. No hedging. I folded it and put it with the rest. The following week, Delia Pruitt called me at the mill office, her voice lower than usual, the way she gets when she's telling you something she's not really supposed to. Dale, she said, I probably shouldn't say this, but the bank called Felicity personally this morning. About the equipment loan. What did they tell her? I asked. 5 months delinquent now, Delia said. 92,000, guaranteed against her and Gary's own house. Not against anything of yours or the mill's. Bank's moving toward foreclosure. 30-day notice going out this week. I didn't ask her to tell me that. I want to be honest about it, but I didn't stop her either, and I sat with the number a long while after we hung up. $92,000. A house worth, last I'd heard. Somewhere around 180,000. Not my land, not my mill. Her own signature, her own guarantee, coming due on its own schedule with nothing left to hide behind. I did not intervene. Some men might call that cold. I call it letting a debt land exactly where the person who signed for it put it. Hollis mentioned a few weeks later, leaning on that same fence line, that he'd seen a notice taped to the front door of Gary and Felicity's house on the far side of town, the kind of orange paper a county sheriff's office posts when a foreclosure sale date gets set. He hadn't meant anything cruel by telling me. He just thought I'd want to know, the way neighbours in a small town tend to think you'd want to know most things eventually, one way or another. Sales set for the county courthouse steps, 3rd Tuesday next month, Hollis said. Opening bids the remaining balance, 61,000 give or take after the short sale fees cleared some of it down already. I stood at that fence a long moment, looking out over land that had never once been at risk in any of this. Land 2 years of quiet paperwork had already protected, before anyone else even understood there was a war being fought over it. I appreciate you telling me straight, Hollis, I said. Man deserves to hear a thing plain instead of second-hand through gossip. That's the only way I know how to tell anybody anything, Hollis said, and went back to his own fence line, and I went back to mine, and neither of us said another word about it, because there wasn't really anything left worth saying. 3 weeks after the dinner, Gary showed up at the mill office unannounced, early, before Otis and the crew had even started the saws. He looked like he hadn't slept much. "Dad," he said, standing in the doorway. The house sold. Short sale, bank forced it through fast once the foreclosure notice hit. We lost about 40,000 off what we owed, once fees and the balance settled out. Felicity's living with her father now. "And you?" I asked. "I've been staying at the Ridgeline Motel out on Route 65, he said. $81 a night. I can't keep doing that much longer." I looked at my son standing in that doorway, 39 years old. Everything he thought he'd inherited by simply marrying well, now gone to a debt that was never mine to begin with. "You want your old job back?" I asked him. "Not owning anything, not managing anybody, grading lumber on the floor same as any new hire." "I want to earn it back," he said, "not be handed it again." I gave him exactly that. A job on the floor. $41,000 a year to start, same as any new grader makes. No favours attached to the number, no shortcuts built into the title. He shows up at 6 every morning now, same as I did for 4 decades. And some mornings I catch him weighing a green board in his hand, the way I taught him, learning slow what his own hands are actually worth. His first week on the floor was rough, and I want to be honest about that too, since I've been honest about everything else. He nicked his hand on the edge of the second day. Nothing serious, 6 stitches at the clinic in Marrow Falls, $80 out of his own pocket, since he no longer carried the manager's insurance plan he'd had for 4 years running the office. He came home that evening, looking more tired than I'd seen him look in a decade of easier work, and for a moment I worried I'd pushed him too hard, too fast, just to prove some point about earning things. I sat with him on the porch that night, both of us quiet a long while. "Was I wrong to ask for the floor job?" he finally said, "instead of something easier?" "No," I told him. "You were right to ask for it. Easier jobs don't teach a man anything he didn't already believe about himself. Only the hard ones do that." He nodded and didn't complain again. Not once. Not in all the months since. By his 3rd month, he could grade a board almost as fast as Otis could. And by the 6th, Otis told me privately that Gary had a better natural eye for grain than most men take a full decade to develop. "He's got his mother's eye for detail," I told Otis, "and his father's hands for what it's worth. Just took him a while to find out he had either one. Otis took him under wing without me even asking. That's the kind of man Otis is. He's clumsy with the calipers still. Otis told me maybe 6 weeks in, but he's listening this time. Didn't used to listen. Now he does. Give him time," I said. "Most things cure fine, given time." Felicity, I'm told, moved back in with Dr. Kessler after the house sold at that loss. I don't know the exact final figure the sale cleared once the bank took its share. I didn't ask. Some debts you let the world collect on its own schedule, and you stop watching the ledger once it's no longer yours to keep. I heard second-hand, through Delia at the bank, that the SPA itself folded within 4 months of the house sale, once the equipment lender called the rest of the note due in full, $161,000, all told, once penalties and interest were added on top of the original balance. Felicity's father co-signed the settlement just to keep her out of bankruptcy court. I felt something when I heard that. Not triumph. Something quieter and sadder than triumph. A woman who might have simply asked for help instead chose a brochure and a red pen, and the bill for that choice came due same as any other bill does. I still drive out to the cemetery most weeks now, more than I used to. I sit by Corinne's stone under the oak, close enough to see the orchard from the fence line, and I tell her things, the way I always have, foolish as it feels some days. "They read your letter out loud," I told her the Sunday after that dinner. Whole table went quiet. You'd have liked that part especially. The wind moved through the persimmon leaves the way it always does. I sat there a long while. Not sad exactly. Just full of something I didn't have a better word for than gratitude. I want to say one more thing, and then I'll let this rest. I never raised my voice through any of it. Not the night I found that brochure. Not the day I learned about the loan. Not even at that table with Corinne's letter open in front of everyone who doubted me. I never threw a punch in my life, and I raised my fists at no one through this whole ordeal. Not once. The only tools I ever used were patience and a plain accounting of the facts, laid out where everyone could see them clearly. That's the whole secret, if you want to call it that. I didn't fight anybody. I just stopped holding up a roof I'd been holding up alone for years, quietly, without complaint, and I let it settle exactly where the weight belonged, onto the people who'd been standing under it the whole time, certain it would never fall. It fell soft in the end. No shouting, no violence, nothing anybody could point to and call cruel, just a folder on a table and a dead woman's handwriting, and a room full of people finally understanding what I'd known all along. I was never the confused one. I was only ever patient, and now at 71 years old, with the mill still standing, and my son learning to earn his place in it again, and Corinne's orchard still bearing fruit every fall. Behind the house we built together board by board, I don't need to be anything else. Patient was always enough. Some months later, on a cool morning much like the one when I first found that brochure, I stood in the mill yard with Otis, weighing a length of oak in my hand, feeling for the grain, same as I have my whole working life. Little heavy still, I said, but it'll cure fine, given time. Otis nodded, the way he always does. Most things do, Dale, given time. I set the board down gentle on the stack, looked out past the yard toward the ridge, toward the house on the hill, where my wife's trees were just starting to turn colour for another fall. I thought, not for the first time, that some things really are worth exactly the patience it takes to see them through. Gary earned a raise 8 months later, $48,000 a year now, promoted to lead grader under Otis, a title he asked for instead of one I offered, which told me more about the man he was becoming than any title ever could. He visits Persimmon Hill most Sundays now, sometimes alone, sometimes with a young woman he's been seeing, quieter than Felicity ever was. A schoolteacher from Marrow Falls named Judith, who asked me the first time she came to dinner how Corinne had chosen the persimmon trees over anything else for that orchard. She said persimmons take patience. I told her, you can't rush them ripe. Pick one too early and it'll pucker your whole mouth up bitter. Wait for it though, and there's nothing sweeter in this county. Judith smiled at that, the kind of smile that isn't performing for anybody, just genuinely pleased. I thought, watching her and Gary across my table that evening, that maybe my son had finally learned the difference between somebody who counts your rooms and somebody who's simply glad to be sitting in one of them with you. Judith asked me that same evening, once Gary had stepped out to the porch to take a call from the mill, whether I minded her asking a personal question. I told her a woman who asks permission first is usually a woman worth answering honestly. Gary told me little about what happened, she said. Careful. The way a person is careful when they're not sure how much ground they're allowed to walk on. I just wondered how you knew, how you actually caught it before it got worse than it did. I told her the same thing I've told anybody who's asked me since. I didn't catch anything special, I said. I just paid attention to numbers the same way I've paid attention to wood my whole life. Wood doesn't lie about what it is. Neither do bank balances if you're willing to look at them plain instead of looking away, because looking away feels kinder in the moment. That's a good way to live, she said. It's the only way I know how, I told her. Cost me some comfort over the years. Never once cost me the truth. She sat with that a moment, the porch light catching the side of her face, and then she said something that stayed with me longer than I expected it to. I think Gary's lucky his father was paying that kind of attention. Not every family gets someone willing to look that closely, even when looking closely is uncomfortable for everybody involved. Every family that lasts has at least one person willing to do it, I told her. Questions only ever whether they do it in time. 6 weeks later, Gary sold his old truck, the one Felicity used to complain didn't suit their address, for $4,200, and put the whole sum toward a machinist certification course at the same vocational school Carla Whitfield would later attend on Corinne's scholarship. He finished it nights and weekends over the following year, on top of his regular shifts on the mill floor, and Otis told me privately, near the end of it, that Gary had asked more questions in that one certification course than he had in 9 years of marriage. He's finally curious about something besides being comfortable, Otis said. That's usually when a man starts actually growing again. I believe you're right, I told him. Around that same time, Gary finally asked me about the second envelope, the one with his own name written on it in his mother's hand, still sitting in that safe deposit box in Marrow Falls. Priscilla mentioned there's something of Mom's, he said, with my name on it. Is that true? It's true, I said. It's been waiting on you since before she died. I didn't open it. Wasn't mine to open. We drove into the bank together the following Saturday, and I sat beside him in that same private room while he broke the seal on his mother's handwriting for the first time. He read it twice, silent, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet again, same as they'd been at that dinner table months before. She knew, he said, quiet. She knew this might happen, long before it did. She saw more than any of us gave her credit for, I said. That was always true about your mother. He didn't tell me everything the letter said, and I didn't ask him to. Some things a mother writes to her son are just for him, same as some things. A wife writes to her husband are just for the marriage they built together, but he folded it careful and put it in his shirt pocket. And he's kept it there, I believe, ever since, close to his chest, the same way I've kept mine. Dr. Kessler called me himself about 4 months after that dinner, out of the blue, apologising again, more thoroughly this time. I want you to know I've stopped signing capacity letters based on family testimony alone, he told me over the phone. I examine the patient myself now, every time, no exceptions. What happened at your table taught me something I should have already known after 30 years of practicing medicine. I appreciate that, Robert, I told him, using his first name for the first time since we'd met. Wish it hadn't taken my table to teach it to you, but I appreciate it all the same. Felicity and I have not spoken since that dinner. I don't carry anger about that anymore, though I did for a good while. Delia mentioned to me last spring that Felicity had taken a position managing the front desk at a hotel outside Marrow Falls, a fresh start of some kind. I found I was glad to hear it. The plain way you're glad to hear any person has found steadier ground after a fall, even a person who once tried to take your roof out from under you. Last fall, the county vocational school held its first ceremony for the scholarship, and the recipient, a 19-year-old girl named Carla Whitfield who wants to be a machinist, stood up at the podium and thanked, in her words, the Corinne Boone Memorial Fund for making her tools and her first year of tuition possible. $2,400 covered her tools alone that year. I sat in the back row of that auditorium and didn't say a word to anybody about who Corinne Boone actually was. Just let the name do its quiet work, the way Corinne herself always did. Carla found me afterward, out in the school parking lot, having asked one of the teachers who'd actually funded the scholarship since the paperwork only listed the trust's name and not mine directly. Mr. Boone, she said, a little nervous, are you the one who set this up? My wife's the one who deserves the thanks, I told her. I just signed the paper that carries her name forward. She kept the books at a sawmill for 36 years and never once complained about the hours. If you want to thank somebody, thank a woman who believed hard work with your hands is worth investing in, even after she's gone. Carla smiled, the kind of smile a young person gives when they've just been handed something bigger than a scholarship check, a sense that somebody, somewhere, believed in the shape of the life they were choosing before they'd even fully chosen it themselves. I'll make her proud, Carla said. I promise you that. I believe you will, I told her. And I drove home that night thinking that maybe this was the actual final accounting of everything that had happened. More than the trust, more than the dinner, more than the $92,000 Felicity's own signature had eventually cost her. A 19-year-old girl with steady hands and a welding certificate ahead of her, carrying my late wife's name into a future neither of us would ever fully see. That felt like the real interest earned on 43 years of patient, unglamorous work, more than any dollar figure the Mills books could ever show. Hollis stopped me at the fence line again that same week, the same spot where he'd first mentioned the surveyor with the clipboard. Heard how the dinner went, he said. Whole county's heard one way or another. Small towns don't keep secrets long. I imagine not, I said. For what it's worth, Hollis said. I always figured you were sharper than most men half your age. Glad the rest of the county's catching up to what your neighbours already knew. Appreciate you saying so, Hollis, I told him, and meant it plainly. A man finds out who actually paid attention to him over the years, right around the time everyone else finally does too. I recorded a new provision in the trust last spring. Small. Nothing dramatic. Setting aside $12,000 a year from the mill's proceeds for a scholarship at the county vocational school. For young people wanting to learn a trade with their hands the way I did. The way this whole town was built by people doing. I named it after Corinne, not after myself. She'd have hated a scholarship name for me. She always said I already had enough monuments standing around this property, in the shape of every board I'd ever cut. The mill turned a profit of just over $410,000 this past year, our best in over a decade. I credit exactly none of that to luck. I credit it to 43 years of grading wood honestly, and to a wife who kept the books straight for 36 of those years. And lately, to a son who's finally learning what his own two hands are worth when nobody's whispering in his ear about what he's owed instead of what he's earned. I still keep that brochure folded in my receipts drawer. I take it out sometimes on quiet evenings, and I look at that red circle around $4,100. And I don't feel anger anymore when I look at it. I feel something closer to a kind of grim gratitude, the way you feel toward a rotten board that shows you exactly where the whole structure was weak, before it had the chance to bring the roof down around you, unaware. That brochure told me the truth, in its own way, same as any piece of wood ever has. I just had to be patient enough, and steady enough, to read what it was really saying. The county vocational school called me again this spring, near a year after Carla stood up at that podium. They're expanding the program, adding a small engine repair track alongside the machining one. They asked if the Corinne Boone Memorial Fund might cover part of the new equipment, $8,600, all told, for the tools a class that size would need. Done, I told them. Just send me the invoice. That's not a small ask, the woman on the phone said, careful like she expected me to negotiate. It's not a small woman I'm honouring either, I told her. 36 years keeping a sawmill's books straight buys a lot more than $8,000 of gratitude, if you ask me. Send the invoice. I paid it the same week, out of the trust's proceeds, same as I've paid every dollar of that scholarship since the day I set it up. Priscilla mentioned, filing the paperwork, that the fund had now put 11 young people through their first year of trade school in under 2 years. 11, she said. That's not nothing, Dale. It's not nothing, I agreed. It's a woman's name doing more good deed than most folks manage while they're living. That was always going to be true about Corinne, whether I helped it along or not. I just made sure the help came with her name attached instead of mine. Gary asked me, not long ago, sitting on the porch on a Sunday evening with Judith beside him, whether I'd ever forgiven Felicity, all the way in the quiet part of myself where a man keeps his real accounting. Forgiveness and trust aren't the same tool, I told him. I've forgiven her. I understand why a woman drowning in debt reaches for the nearest thing that looks like a rope, even if the rope belongs to somebody else. But I'll never hand her a saw again. Some tools you only lend a man once, and only if he's shown you he knows which end is sharp. Gary nodded slow the way he does now when he's actually turning something over instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. That's fair, he said. It's the only kind of fair I've got in me these days, I told him, and meant it plain. My name is Dale Boone. I built a sawmill with my own hands. I buried a wife I loved for 41 years. And I was called confused by people who never once bothered to check whose name was actually on the deed. They know now. Every one of them knows now. And I never raised my voice once the whole way through.